So, everybody, welcome back to the Because I Can podcast. We're now going to move into season two, and it seems like a really long time ago that we sort of did this sort of stuff. And in fact, the world has changed quite a lot. And I think if there was a theme for what we're going to talk about, probably over the next few weeks, really, it is that no change, no opportunity. And we've certainly seen a lot of change over the last 2 years. So, to that avail, I'm going to introduce our guest in just a minute. I'm obviously joined by Paul Horwood, who's part of the Sandstone team, and obviously done all the first season with us as well. But today we've got joining us Dave Mumby. Dave is a partner at Knight Frank, looking after the kind of London region. And in fact, Dave, unless I'm hugely mistaken, we last met at the bottom of a ski slope in Italy, or certainly maybe it was Verbier. And if I'm hugely mistaken, I think Paul and I were probably waiting for you to catch up or cross the line or something along those lines.
Nice to see you both. It's amazing how time blurs a memory, for sure. So very nice to see you both again. But you're quite right. I think it was part of a city ski challenge that we were doing in Verbier, and I think the world was an entirely different place at that time. But that was my introduction to Sandstone, and it's been a good relationship since. So nice to see you again.
Thanks, Dave. So I think probably our theme for today, us, like you, we've been kind of working from home, using computers, Zooming everywhere. We're starting to get sort of back face to face again, which frankly is quite exciting. We're obviously sort of a people company, and it's quite nice to get back with people. Kick us off, Dave. How's things at Knight Frank? What's it kind of like with you guys?
I think it's been absolutely extraordinary, and there's been a time there where there's been huge challenge. There's been huge times for self-reflection. What do we do as a business? Where do we go as a business? How do we even try and plan for this when every day seems to be getting worse? And all I can say is it's been very lucky in many respects, but also a real privilege to be able to work in property. Because if Knight Frank was a business that was involved in hospitality, or many other different sectors, I think we'd be having a very different type of conversation now. I mean, Knight Frank has come out of the pandemic as a stronger business, and actually having had a record year in terms of output for the business as well. And pleased to say that we've got more people working for us now than we did at the start of or pre-pandemic time. So it's been absolutely extraordinary, with massive lessons for all of us. But ultimately, obviously, very sad times for a lot of people. And we don't forget that for 1 minute. But from a resilience factor from the business, and knowing that we've got the strength as a partnership, it was really tested. And I think it's reinforced our belief that it's the right structure to have for us as a business.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost a massive irony there, Paul, isn't there? In that, Dave, we all met on a corporate hospitality event as a result of challenge, as a result of travelling, rather. Ironically, to talk about resilience. And if we talk about two industries, perhaps in the last few years that are hardest hit, I would imagine travel and hospitality, particularly corporate hospitality, must be somewhere near the top of that list. Definitely.
Yeah, it was interesting actually. I've just got back from another ski event, the same one that we met on a few years ago. And that particular company that organised that event said that they were a few weeks away from going bust, and that's a business that's been around for 20 years. And I think it's been testament to them in a way, and testament to everybody that they felt brave enough to come back out and start seeing people face to face. And it was probably the biggest event that I've been to, where there was 170 odd people hitting the slopes to have a good time. And it was great. But look, I came back with COVID. So it's not over yet, is all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's how we develop strategies, isn't it, to cope with it, I think, going forward. I certainly don't have the answer. I wish I did have the answer. Presumably somebody at Pfizer or similar does have the answer, is waiting for that to release. Big science, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. So Dave, where do you think things are going to go then? Coming as we are, fingers crossed, moving towards perhaps the end stage of the lockdown, perhaps people starting to get back to thinking of going back to face. What's going to happen? I mean, for 100 years, we've had a certain office culture, a certain way of doing business, a certain, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. are we going to move back to that? Is there going to be some flexibility? Where do you feel we're going? Where's our corporate culture? Where's our office culture going to be?
I think it's a huge question, and I think it's one that would take a huge amount of deconstructing to go into every element, depending on what sector you're in. I mean, we've got a significant number of different service lines across the business, and it's very different in every different sector. I can tell you, as a business for us now, as a firm, it's a global firm, but certainly across the UK, that element of it where we've got over 5,000 people, everyone is back to work and everyone is back to the office. What that means in reality is, do we have all 5,000 people doing what they were doing 2 years ago? Absolutely not. It's changed, and it's changed significantly. I think there were lots and lots of lessons which we learned about working from home. My own experience, I used to spend a lot of time going between meetings, going between offices, going between different locations, and I've got quite a bit of time back, just in terms of not having to travel and actually be able to utilize the technology. So that's really helped. Will the office culture ever be the same again? No. Does the firm think, and do I think that we will return to having the same number of people back in offices? No. We think that's fundamentally changed, and we think that's a permanent change. Probably something like 75% is a real assessment of the number of people that we back in the office on in inverted commas, full-time basis. But it's not, I think the big learning from my side of it is not necessarily about presenteeism. It's about output and being effective wherever you need to be. There are certain skill sets, there are certain jobs where you have to be getting as much face time as you can. But we also have to remember that whilst our fee-earning staff, our estate agency side of the business, are back in full time, a lot of our clients aren't. So we can't go meet everyone face to face.
Well, I think, Dave, it's interesting you say that, right? One of the things I found really, really interesting is, obviously we really early on in the pandemic, we started to run kind of critical decision making, leadership type seminars, helping leaders, make the least terrible decision, essentially. And I think what was quite funny is the year before that, if you spoke to people about working from home, it was the older generation, dare I say it, generation. I mean, you're looking quite youthful, Dave, but luckily it's a podcast, right? So no one can tell. But actually, that were kind of poo-pooing and harumphing working from home, and the younger generation were all kind of, let's go and work for home. And yet, ironically, as the pandemic has gone on, my experience of working with some of the companies we work with is that, ironically, it should be the other way around. So what we found is that actually it's people our age and older that have found that they can be really quite productive working from home. The internet does work. Who'd have thought? But also, actually, you do get time back. You get commute time back. And actually, it turns out you don't need to do 140 hours a week. You do quite hard get on with your wife or your husband, and you quite like your kids. And therefore, it's kind of worked. Whereas, ironically, a lot of the younger generation, I'm certainly not blanket everybody, but actually have found that the isolation from being at home is not brilliant. And also, there's no kind of osmosis learning. So you're super isolated. You're expected to get on with stuff. You can only be measured by your achievement, because I can't see whether you're at work or not. Essentially, I can tell you've logged on, right? But come on, we've all done that, right? Logged on, go and made tea, right? So actually, the funny thing is, for me, I think it's kind of almost reversed a little bit, where the younger generation, or perhaps the less experienced people, are the ones that need to get back in the office. They need to sit next to the partner at night, Frank, and see how it's done and see how you handle clients, and that learning that is not classroom based, if that makes sense, but kind of osmosis based. Whereas ironically, it's some of the people our generation that actually turns out Friday at home, you're super productive and much more chilled out by the time you get around to Monday.
It's a really interesting one, because there's a bit of a cheesy expression, but I think it's been so true over the course of the last couple of years to say that a culture of a firm is caught, and it's very hard to catch that culture over a screen. And so many people that you meet who are in senior positions in business are the combination of having worked for probably 10 great bosses over the preceding 20 years. They've picked up little bits of, it can be an expression, it can be a turn of phrase, it can be a mannerism when delivering a message, where you just witness it, a thing that's fantastic, you then repeat it. Whoever's then watching you do it then repeats it to their team, and so on and so forth, and all the way through. I just think as well, it's very we've got to remember that if you are 40 plus or whatever it might be, we've probably got space at home. You're probably not in a 2-bedroom flat or a 1-bedroom flat working off your bed in a shared house, of which lots of people that work for us are. So it's an interesting one in terms of how productive you can be in the environment that you find yourself in. And there's a slight concern, definitely, for us as a business, and I know friends and family as well, where how are you supposed to progress up through the ladder without direct mentoring and without that physical contact and communication, where the job requires it. But even if you're in IT programming, it can be very helpful to be having breakout sessions together in a room and not on a screen, and just actually trying to find a way forward.
You trying to kid us now that you know anything about IT programming? Who are you out for dinner at the weekend with?
That's where I was going to leave the conversation and move swiftly on to a bit. So it's really interesting, and I see. I've bumped, I'm not going to name names, but it was really interesting a couple of weeks ago when I bumped into a graduate that had spent a rotation across my region in London. He's a fantastic guy. But I said, are you going into the office every day? And he said, no, I'm sort of going in once or twice a week where I can. We don't like to go in really on a Monday, and we don't really like to go in on a Friday.
You're talking about James Davis, aren't you?
He's always dialing in from the ski slopes. That's the problem. I sort of looked at it and I thought, God, that's our culture, that's our firm, and that's where it is. And I just thought, you're going to find it really, really tough to be able to excel at what you do and get exposure to the very best people in the marketplace. And he's in an alternative sector, but you still need that interaction. And I think the real balance moving forward is going to be a blend of it. Paul, you touched on offices, and we've said probably 75% is the right amount of time that people are going to come back. But offices are changing dramatically. I only need to look at our HQ on Baker Street. We normally have about 1,400 people in there. We've had nowhere near that number back yet. It's been getting better, but I think the maximum we've had is about 1,000. But we've opened the whole space up. We've thought about how we can engage with clients. How can we entice clients to come and see us? And there's a phrase now where it used to be called the Central Business District. What does that look like? Now it's about the Central Cultural District. So every firm has got to put their culture on display. And if we're going to get people back into the office, it needs to be a great working environment. So we're throwing free lunches, we're throwing rooftop barbecues, we're making the spaces open. With great breakout spaces for people to go and write on walls and do all sorts of stuff. And it's just a nicer place to be. So I think that's a real upside.
David, when we talk about rapport building with people, a lot of people, as an example, confuse brand and corporate identity, right? Corporate identity is what colour it is, but a brand is a set of beliefs and motivations. It's a why, isn't it? And actually, for me, culture is very much the same thing, isn't it? I totally agree with you. It's the why, it's the intrinsic, isn't it? It's the bit that comes with it, not the sort of colour of your kit, as it were. And I think now that to try and accelerate that back up to speed is probably the bit that is missing, internally as well as externally, because actually, if our internal teams haven't yet got that through no fault of their own because they haven't been exposed to it. I was dealing with a company the other day, 160 employees, of which 50% have never met each other ever. How do you accelerate that culture? It's interesting, isn't it? So, but if that's creating opportunity, then because suddenly people are saying, well, hang on a minute, let's not regurgitate the Knight Frank catalogue. Let's actually think about who we are and why we are, rather than what we are. I think that's a good thing.
No, I'd agree, and it's one of the really interesting things for me. I've been with Knight Frank for 15 years, and actually, you think you know people pretty well. And it's people who I sometimes thought were going to handle lockdown really well, didn't. And sometimes people who I thought were maybe the quieter ones, who might be a little bit more affected by the environment they're working in, have been absolute rocks. And that's been an interesting development of our culture. And I think it's been an opportunity for everybody to have a voice and everybody to have an input about what it looks like and what do we need to create when we come back. And I think that's probably helped us get more people back into the business, just by opening it up and saying, if you do come back, what do you want it to look like? How can it be? And I've certainly now given more accountability to people that maybe would have taken a few more years to develop that. So it's been an accelerative learning for them. And some of our more senior people, we've really had to have a look at and say, and help and support in a lot of different ways, but they found it more challenging.
There's a really famous poem, and it's something like not laughing but drowning. And I can't remember the words, but it's the person offshore waving, and because everyone waves back again, and the reality is that they're actually drowning, not flying. And it's actually quite interesting, particularly in a sales or a retail environment, which obviously you guys ultimately work in. And that is that often the biggest performers, if you take away their audience, struggle. So if you take away the large characters and the kind of larger than life, the law firms would call them the rainmakers. But if you remove their audience and you remove their tools, then actually they're often the people that don't know how to deal with that. Whereas the kind of steady Eddie that keeps trooping is still trooping, and actually can shine in high pressure environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I sit on a trustee of a mental health charity, and this is one of the areas that we've been particularly concerned about, is the fact that we're social animals. We've spent years chatting and unloading and gossiping, and with that removed, and it's great to hear, Dave, that Knight Frank have really thought about this and are bringing people back in that way. But there's an awful, as Tim said, there's an awful lot of companies out there where new people have joined, never met anyone, they're sitting at home isolated, they're not having that gossip, that interaction. And I think we, as perhaps those in more managerial or leadership positions, need to be even more careful about how we interact with those people, because if you one wrong word or one perhaps grumpy word, if we're in the office, within 20 minutes or an hour, we'd have had a chat and a cup of tea and it would all be back to normal. But this, when you're at home and you're isolated, that can fester and you can mull over it and worry about it, and it becomes a real big issue. So, leading and managing in this more remote or, leading and managing through a screen just has more added complications, because that person you might not see for 4 or 5 more days. And all the worry and anxiety and hassle and stuff like that when they're sitting perhaps in their bed sit on their own, not interacting with other people. I think we do certainly lose a lot of the social aspect that we perhaps didn't realise from the office.
Well, I think, like you say, it's pretty easy to put your Zoom face on, right? It's pretty easy to kind of go, I've got to check in today with his team. For 40 minutes, his meeting's going to last. I can sit here and look like I need to look, can't I? But had we been in the office, if something had happened to me, you'd pick up on that quite quickly, because I'm not going to bluff that all day. Whereas I think it's quite easy to put a Zoom face on. The other thing that's really funny, though, we would say, right, what is it about Zoom meetings, right? Or Teams, or other providers are available if you can afford them and have the bandwidth. And actually, the first thing is we have the seance moment, right? So everyone logs in and they go, Dave, I can feel you, I can hear you, but I can't see you. Dave, are you there? Oh, you're there. And then the minute it hooks up, we go, right, brilliant, agenda point 1, let's go. Whereas we say to everybody, if this was live, whether that's a session that we run or a business meeting, we'd wander into an atrium somewhere, or we'd wander into a cafe somewhere, and you'd have a coffee, and you'd say, Dave, how you doing? Yeah, I'm all right, mate, actually. How about you? Yeah, it's all right. And you'd have this kind of 5-minute interaction first, and probably afterwards as well. Whereas this whole kind of electronic Zoom thing, everyone's just kind of like, yeah, hooked up, right, go, yeah, brilliant, right, finished, off. And we sort of certainly encourage people in all of our meetings just to go, whoa, hang on a minute, why don't we just interact? What, with no agenda point? Yeah, I mean, literally just interact. Should I put it in the chat box? No, let's just talk. It's weird.
It's I don't know if you found it as well, but I mean, I certainly found that it was incredibly hard to switch off. So, I also found that clients were calling me at all times, calling me at weekends, calling me in the evening. It's like, well, what are you doing? If there's nothing else going on at the moment, why can't I reach you? And that was tough in terms of being able to manage that as well, to turn around and say, actually, you still need to be able to switch off. I found it really intense to begin with, specifically for the first 6 months, as we moved to a Zoom Microsoft Teams life. I was finding myself in front of a computer from 8:30 until 7 o'clock at night, doing back-to-back meetings with a brief stop for lunch. And it was exhausting. And it was interesting. I turned around and just said that is absolutely not sustainable. And how we all decided it's not sustainable, and how can we change it? And your point there, Tim, is so important for the old corridor chat. You have a conversation, maybe an area of conflict, something doesn't get said, or it's a flyaway comment which you just think, God, I'm on my 9th meeting today, I didn't mean it, whatever it might be. And as you say, you pull them aside in the corridor afterwards and say, look, really sorry, but I was frustrated, and this is the point I was trying to make. You can't do that when the screen's gone dead. So just actually finding a time, even ironically, if it's over Teams or over Zoom, calling them up and just saying, what have you got going on? Is everything okay? And actually, can we just have 15 minutes just to chat it through at a more leisurely pace, as you've said, without that agenda? And it is the human element of a Zoom conversation, which we had to make time for. And that's, again, it's been an absolute challenge, but I think I could see teams that were doing that really well, where probably the leader of that was instigating it. And it's downtime, whether it was a quiz at the end of the week, and everyone got a bit sick and tired of those after a while, or if it was just drinks. I mean, we sent drinks around lots of different teams and said, meet us for drink at 6 o'clock on Friday. Everyone can just have soft drink, alcoholic drink, whatever takes their fancy. But it really did make a difference. And it's, I think it's realizing that it's unbelievably stressful in a different way. And with all things, we cannot have people that are stressed. A bit of pressure is fine, but when that tips over into stress, life becomes really unpleasant for them, completely unproductive for us, and that's been a real learning curve.
But yeah, they should remain nameless because they're one of the big four and we'll never work for them again if I told you who it was. But I got a phone call from somebody very, very senior who said, Tim, would you do me a favour? He said, my lot are rubbish at running Teams or Zoom meetings. He said, they're boring, they're not engaging. Would you mind doing us a session to run, like how to run kind of engaging Zoom meetings? And I said, well, we'll do our best. And we got our David involved. And so Dave and I put this whole thing together, like video clips, and we did all of that. And as the people started to log in, as it ticked past 165 people on one Zoom call, I said, I think I may have the problem, chap. I said, I think we'll start this. Is probably don't have 165 people on a Zoom call would probably be my top tip. You struggle to interact with 165 people in a room as a keynote speaker, let alone on a Zoom call. So yeah, there we go.
As a manager of people, and as we mentioned earlier, as someone who's sort of 40 plus and been around a business environment for a long time, I was reminded of this recently. Actually, I coach my son in an under 10s rugby at a weekend.
You are that dad, aren't you? As long as you enjoy it, son. Just don't lose again.
Just make sure we win. Because last Sunday, there's one kid in there who was particularly challenging in the group, and whether there's slight learning difficulties or who knows what it might be, but he reacted pretty volatile character. And afterwards, the group of coaches got together and we were talking about it and said, how do we handle this kid? And there was a couple of the coaches who said, if it was my child who behaved in that forum in that manner, I'd have excluded them and I'd have taken them out. And actually, that's not the answer. The answer is it's us who has to change. And we've got to accommodate this child in the environment that we have. And the environment we create is up to us. And it was just a really interesting conclusion that we drew to turn around and say it's the older guys of the team, whether it's in our management day job or whether it's in a social environment. It's up to us to change and to set the environment and to control the environment moving forward, to include everyone who has their own particular challenges. And
I totally agree with you. We've been sort of banging the drum for a while, really. And I mean, first of all, actually relieve pressure, not add pressure to increase performance. If it's the pressure that's making you drop the ball, don't increase the pressure because you're going to drop the ball again, essentially. And we have this interesting thing about, reward the behaviours that you want to see again. So it's far easier to get somebody to replicate something they've done right than keep beating them up for something they've done wrong, where you're learning to ski, play rugby or do business, because actually, if I tell you what you're doing wrong, you still don't know what right looks like. So actually, if you can get in the habit of creating an outcome and rewarding the behaviour that you want to see again, in my view anyway, you'll actually create success far quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, if you really want to stress someone out in today's world, then take away the operating parameters. I think if you take away that structure and you take away that environment of what success looks like, and you leave them on their own for too long, that can really fester into pretty significant stress pretty quickly. So it's engaging in a different manner and setting the parameters freshly so everyone understands them, I think, is, again, another lesson learned over the last 2 years.
I think we've discussed this before. Essentially, if you've got any kind of specialist selection with the military for any of the special forces or special duties units, the first thing they do is remove all the parameters. So actually, you go for a run and you've no idea how far or how fast you're going to go. You get into your bed at night, you've no idea whether you can be there 1 hour or 10 hours. It's rarely 10 hours. But the reason they do that is because it is the single fastest way to mess somebody up. It's the single fastest way to make somebody question themselves, doubt themselves, and test their resilience. And essentially, we've just done 2 years of that. And we wonder why people are perhaps reacting not in the way they would have chosen to do so. So top tip then, Dave, because we've been going for that. Most people have been out running are probably now looking for a shower. Opportunity not for the change. Where would it be? What do you reckon going forward? Next 6 months, where's the opportunity?
Are you talking about from an engagement point of view, from a firm point of view, or from property?
All of the above. All of the above, Dave. Even your lads' rugby team. I mean, I'm probably going to start with getting a new coach, but
well, where does opportunity present itself the most? I think it's an amazing opportunity for every firm, whether you're small in whatever, or you're big like us, or any sector that you choose to be in. As people are now returning, it is the best opportunity we've had in years to reset the culture and to reinforce culture. And that's going to be gone before you know it, because everyone's going to be back within the next 6 to 12 months, and you have a real window of opportunity to, I think, effect real change.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And I think that's a really exciting opportunity that needs to be capitalised upon and not be daunted by it, but actually really embrace it. And I think it's really positive. From a property perspective and from a firm-wide perspective for us, look, we've been incredibly fortunate to be on the back of one of the strongest property markets in the last 30 years. So it's about continuing on with that, making sure we do what we're really good at. We don't offer all things to all people, and we never will, but really realizing what you're good at as a business, and how can you become the absolute best in class in that. I think goes back to the first point in terms of culture, and secondly, being really, really ambitious. I think there's massive opportunity to come out of the next as we come out of lockdowns and entire workforces come forward, being really ambitious. And I think we have reset our goals to be much bigger than we ever thought they would be. But look, we've got a bit of a tailwind, and we're gonna catch on to it and go as fast as we possibly can. So I think from our side, it comes back to people. And I know if I've got the best people I possibly can in an incredibly tough recruitment environment, I've got to sell the culture and get people on board, but that's half the battle. But I think that's the opportunity for us.
Dave, I was just going to say, it's really nice from our point of view, because obviously we spend all day talking about people. And I think one of the things that people should take out of this chat today, from all of us really, is that whether you're a small kind of boutique company like we are, or actually a Leviathan like Knight Frank is, what we've spoken about today is people, right? It's face-to-face people. And I just think that's brilliant. And I think sometimes we forget that. And I think sometimes the smaller companies forget that you have exactly the same problems that we do. And I think that sometimes the bigger companies forget, that the individuals is what it's all about. So to hear you talking about actually people, I think for me, that's an amazing takeaway.
And Dave, thanks for mentioning culture again. I love the idea that we've got this honeymoon period now where we can actually develop or have the culture that we've perhaps always wanted to, or maybe challenge we've always done it that way, and we've got a small window to actually go, well, maybe we want it like this now. So thank you, that was awesome.
Yeah,
Dave, thanks for your time, mate, and just maybe we'll see you around a set of GS gates maybe next year. We'll see what goes on. I say CS, obviously, Paul and I will wait for you. It'll be fine.
We'll see you at the bottom.
Listen, it's really good to see you again, and hopefully we'll be doing more business together as well.
Yeah, definitely.